Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on secure payments, resources, and next steps. My name is Mary Ellen Thielen, and I'm delighted to participate in today's event as a member of the Federal Reserve's Industry Relations team. We have a full agenda for today, as shown on slide number 2, so let me kick it off with some introductions. Our first speaker, Ed O'Neill, is Vice President of Secure Payments for the Federal Reserve System. He helps lead the design, development, and implementation of strategies to reduce payments fraud risk and advance the safety, security, and resiliency of the U.S. payment system. Ed will provide an overview of strategies for improving the U.S. payment system, discuss the work of the Secure Payments Task Force, and preview the Fed's next steps in payment security. Our next speaker, Brian Penny, is Vice President of Payments and New Markets for Nordstrom. In this role, he supports all payments functions for Nordstrom companies and the digital servicing of Nordstrom-branded credit cards. Brian was a participant on the Secure Payments Task Force. Suzanne Martindale is a senior attorney at the West Coast Office of Consumers Union, which is the advocacy and public policy arm of Consumer Reports. Suzanne also was a participant on the Secure Payments Task Force and served on its steering committee. Our last speaker, Megan Musgrave, is my colleague on the Industry Relations team for the Federal Reserve System. She leads our efforts to recruit and engage members of the Fed Payments Improvement Community, a group which is now more than 4,000 strong. Today, she'll tell us more about the community. As you have questions during this webinar, please submit them electronically. We'll answer questions at several points during the webinar and at the end. With that, let's begin with an overview by Ed O'Neill. Ed?
All right. Thank you, Mary Ellen. And first of all, I want to thank everybody on the line today for joining us on this webinar to give you an update on the Secure Payments Task Force journey, as well as the strategies for improving the U.S. payment system journey over the course of the last 2.5, 3 years. And also very happy and very thankful that we're joined by Suzanne Martindale and Brian Penny today, who, as Mary Ellen pointed out, were members of the Secure Payments Task Force. Suzanne also served on our steering committee, and they're here to share their thoughts and perspectives on some of the task force deliverables that we'll be talking about here as well. I'm also excited to talk to you about the current work within the Federal Reserve on payment security improvement and our future engagement efforts with the industry. And we'll talk about those plans here towards the latter half of the presentation. If we could just start on slide 3, what I do want to start off with is just grounding everybody in the history and of the secure payments efforts, but also the broader strategies for improving the U.S. payment system. So on slide 3 here you see is really representative of the strategies for improving the U.S. payment system paper that was launched back in 2015. If you go on and look at that paper, which is publicly available, that paper contemplates really 5 different strategies and desired outcomes, really focused on 5 key areas, which are faster payments, which is the first box on the left, secure payments, efficient payments, being able to transmit payments and receive payments internationally, as well as our collaboration efforts, which really support all of these different strategies. Today, we're going to focus a lot on the secure payments efforts and give you a background on not only the task force, but also the upcoming events and activities with respects to secure payments. But we thought it'd be helpful just to provide just a quick overview of the journey that we've been on from the broader strategies perspective and the work that's been done there. If we could turn to slide 4. I do want to provide just a brief overview of the Secure Payments Task Force. So as I mentioned, back in 2015 with the publication of the strategies for improving the U.S. payment system, the Federal Reserve also, in its leader catalyst role, launched the Secure Payments Task Force. So in the middle of 2015, that task force was formed. And the important part here is that forum was really meant to allow for all industry stakeholders to participate in that forum in a transparent manner, everybody to have an equal and equitable voice at the table to discuss payment security improvements, and also to advise the Federal Reserve in its role as leader, catalyst, and operator in certain payment systems on payment security matters and help determine areas of focus for payment security priority and for action. As you can see here, we did have a representative group from across the various industry segments. What you see here is a breakdown of the the representation on the task force by the 8 different segments within the industry. As you can see, there was representation from all different types of financial institutions, large, medium, and small institutions. We had government end users and business end users represented, consumer interest organizations, as well as non-bank providers and other stakeholders that represent various parts of the payments ecosystem. If we turn to slide 5, I just want to spend a few moments before we dive into the deliverables of just talking about the journey that the Secure Payments Task Force took and the accomplishments that were achieved over the last couple of years. So we already talked about in 2015, the Secure Payments Task Force was formed. The first order of business there is the task force participants really socialized and aligned on and prioritized the various areas of focus for future action. So the group started with roughly a dozen or so different topics and activities that they were focused on, and eventually narrowed that down to really 4 key areas of focus. Those are that folks centered around payment identity management, data protection, information sharing for the mitigation of payments risk and fraud, and law and regulation coordination. In 2016, the task force launched the work groups associated with those 4 areas of focus I mentioned, with the first one being the Payment Identity Management Group, followed quickly by the Information Sharing Work Group and the Data Protection Groups, and also the Law and Regulation Coordination Work Group was stood up to help support those efforts. In addition to those 4 work groups, a standards assessment team was also formed to help support each of those efforts in looking at the various standards that are applicable in the payments system today, looking also for any opportunities for improvement or any changes that might be needed to standards in order to facilitate payment security improvements. In addition, the task force also cross-collaborated with the Faster Payments Task Force. One of the first deliverables of the Secure Payments Task Force was to help design and develop the security-related effectiveness criteria that ultimately were included in the Faster Payments Effectiveness Criteria. Those 11 security criteria made up almost a third of the total Faster Payments Effectiveness criteria, and they were used to help evaluate the faster payments solutions that were brought to the Faster Payments Task Force for evaluation. In 2017, the first deliverable was published by the task force, which is the Information Sharing Data Sources, which Brian will touch upon here shortly, and give you some insights into what the data sources are and the various uses for those. In addition, we also started to complete work on the payment lifecycles and security profiles, which we'll talk about here shortly as well. Suzanne will provide a brief overview of those. And in 2018, those payment lifecycles and security profiles were ultimately approved by the task force through the decision-making framework vote. And really at that point in early 2018, with the publication of the first 2 foundational deliverables of the task force, the Federal Reserve took a step back and evaluated the next steps, and at that point decided to conclude the formal task force efforts at the end of March 2018. But that didn't mean that work was done. So at that point, we transitioned all Secure Payments Task Force participants to the broader Fed Payments Improvement community, which Megan will touch upon here shortly. And we also continue to have various engagement efforts with the industry and conduct other payment security improvement activities, which we'll talk about here shortly. So the key message here is that while the task force concluded, the work of the Federal Reserve as a leader catalyst in secure payments is not over, and we're happy to share some interesting activities and more engagement opportunities here at the end of the presentation. So with that, let me pause and just see if there's any questions that have come in on the Secure Payments Task Force. All right. Hearing none at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Brian Penny to walk you through the Information Sharing Data Sources deliverable. So Brian, let me turn it to you.
Thanks, Ed. And I also want to thank the Fed in general. As somebody that's been involved in the payments community for the past 4 or 5 years, and through the rest of my career, the Fed heard the industries talking about providing a way for the community to collaborate in a non-competitive, very informative way. And I got involved in the Secure Payments Task Force about about a year into the process, so 2 years ago, and found that it was so refreshing to be able to talk to banks without having to say any concerns or any issues that exist out there. And I thank the Fed for their ongoing efforts that they're working through with the payments community and the work that will be coming from there. So as you can see on slide 6, there were 2 task force deliverables, as Ed had mentioned, the information sharing data sources, and those helped identify and reduce payment fraud in the system. And I think all of us that are part of the payments community realize that no one person can solve the fraud problem. We all have to work together because the fraudsters are always one step ahead of us. And then the second deliverable was the payments lifecycle and security profiles. That was developed and released earlier this year by the Secure Payments Task Force. This one was designed to help the stakeholders better understand how payments work and highlight the key security considerations when discussing the organization's payments operation and your security initiatives. I think the one thing with both of these resources is there's not a lot of formal education around payments. And this tool, is the Secure Payments Task Force website, is being provided by the Fed to help enhance the community and enhance the education within there. Both of these resources are available on the task force dedicated website, which is securepaymentstaskforce.org. So with that, I'll go to slide 7, and I'll give you some more detail around the information sharing data sources. The information sharing data sources is a list of resources that is at this point about 55 different data sources on cybersecurity and fraud prevention. The list is kind of a one-stop shop for the payments industry stakeholders to access intelligence reports, information on fraud trends, and links to articles that offer insights and help improve an organization's payment security. And notice that I didn't mention anything about any one industry. This isn't for banks. This isn't for organizations. It isn't for non-bank providers. It is for everyone in the ecosystem to have an equal playing field to be able to look at these data sources. You can filter the list based on payment type. So if you only deal with ACHs or checks or credit, debit, wire, you can filter first by that. You can also then filter by the payment system participant. As I said, whether you're a financial institution, a business end user, merchant, retailer, or a non-bank provider, you can filter those out. But it's also interesting to look at the whole list to understand what the other members in the ecosystem are looking at. Also is the availability of the source. Is it freely available, or is it subscription or member-based? And whether the source is general or transactional. I think the key here is that when you get into payments, if you just start searching the web, you don't know whether that source is reliable, has good information. All of these sources were vetted by industry experts and have provided a good source for someone to go to and look at the information. So if we turn to page 8, you ask, well, how would I use these? And I think the key here is if you have someone that comes to you and you want to look for a way to research in the payments space, this is how you can do it. You can find industry organizations that you can become involved in. You can find other resources that are out there just as a resource in the community. From a financial institution perspective, you can leverage timely and actionable reports highlighting payment fraud incidents, cybersecurity threats across the payments industry, and other general information. As a merchant or a business end user, you can leverage best practices and benchmarks to help us, I'm a retailer, prevent data breaches and fraud attacks. And I think that one thing about payments, especially when you're talking about retailers and business end users, payments it isn't what our core business is. It's something that we need to make our business work. And so benchmarking and sharing of data is very important in that space. There's also the use of payment stakeholders, and they can learn from other vendors, leverage their best practices, and benchmark to help protect against data breaches and fraud attacks. But at the end of the day, what we're all trying to do is make the community better and make the community more valuable as a whole, because any one part of the community isn't strong enough to drive down fraud and keep the consumer's information safe. So with that, I'll pause and see if there's any questions.
Just as a reminder to the group, if you have a question, there's the Ask Question button at the bottom of the webinar screen. That's how you can ask your question. And we do have 2 questions so far. One of the questions, how can I recommend that a data source be added to the list?
And Brian, this is Ed. I think I can take that one for you just based on the Federal Reserve hosting the website on behalf of the task force. So if you do have any recommendations for new data sources to be added to that list, there is a method for you to within the website to select or to kind of note that you have an additional data source to recommend. You can fill out that information there, and it will be submitted to the Federal Reserve, which we monitor that mailbox very frequently for any changes or requests that come in for updates to the data sources.
We also have another question. How often are the data sources updated?
Sure, and this is Ed. I can take that one again as well. And those data sources will be updated on an ongoing basis as they're submitted. So we will do our best to aggregate submissions as they come in and make updates in a batch format as they become available. However, we are going to try and process those in a timely manner as they come in.
Great, thank you. We do not currently have any additional questions. So with that, let me thank Brian for his comments and turn the call over to Suzanne Martindale.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you again to the Fed for really for not just hosting this webinar today, but for the years-long leadership that you've shown in bringing us all together. I love the way that Brian put it, that this is about making our community better. This is a community because every single one of us, whether in our professional capacities or simply as individual consumers, are affected by the strengths and the weaknesses of the payment system. So I spent for the entire duration of the task force, I served as steering committee member, representing the interests of consumer end users. Consumers are often left out of the conversation when it comes to discussing things like, standards, best practices, and so forth. So it was really a unique opportunity to bring together a few hundred very diverse stakeholders in, again, as Brian said, a much more collegial, a not so competitive, not as adversarial environment. As in my role at Consumers Union as a senior attorney, I work on policy issues, and so I'm very familiar with being on opposing sides with, say, a financial institution on a piece of legislation, and at times when we find ourselves more disagreeing. But I think that we all, on our work on the task force, recognized the need for us to all come together to identify how things work today, where there are problems, because I don't think anyone would say that our payment system is perfect, and try to make those initial steps toward identifying, again, how payments flow today, where there are areas for improvement, so we can begin to have the kind of robust stakeholder dialogue that will be needed to move this large and complex industry forward, again, to promote a faster while also more secure payment system. Now, Ed did refer to the fact that starting in early 2016, the task force had set up some work groups to cover various aspects of payment security. What we discovered, soon after the task force is that many of these workflows really needed to be brought together because there was a lot of overlap. So particularly between the payment identity management work group and the data protection work group, there started to become a sense that we needed to lay out the payment flows really end to end to show how payments move today, and that could actually be the sort of foundational document that could really launch us into the next phase of stakeholder engagement to move payments forward. So that's really what the payment life cycles and security profiles turned into. So they're meant to be a comprehensive educational resource for all stakeholders in the payments industry. They provide perspectives related to the end-to-end cycle of most common payment types, so covering enrollment, transaction flow, and reconciliation, flagging the common security methods, identity management controls, and data protection practices occurring at every step of the payment flow, and also to provide a reference to, with respect to a particular payment type, the relevant laws, regulations, other types of references, including various types of standards, and also flagging challenges, areas where we need to improve security. And so to identify those really as opportunities that should be associated with each payment type. So if you could move on to slide 10. Now, these profiles were the result of extensive stakeholder dialogue, a lot of revisions, comments between the work groups, often vetted by the steering committee, brought back to the full task force. This went through several iterations, but what we ended up developing, I think, it's really a remarkable achievement, I think. We developed comprehensive end-to-end profiles for 8 common payment types, which you can now see here. So ACH, various types of card transactions, card present, card not present, card present with a PIN, as well as check, contactless, wallet, and wire. So some of the old, some of the new, but the major ways that payments typically flow today. If you can move on to the next slide. And so now this is a really great online resource that is on the Secure Payments Task Force website that you can navigate in an interactive way to get the kinds of information that you need. The profiles provide a definition of the payment type so that we're all using the same terms the same way. That's something that we talked about quite a bit at the task force as a challenge in and of itself, that sometimes we don't use these terms, we don't define them in the same way. So we spend a lot of time ensuring that we were defining the payment types correctly, and that we all agreed that we were covering the right kind of ground. And so then we also lay out, after defining the payment types, we lay out the entire life cycle, again, end to end, enrollment, transaction, and reconciliation. And then for each step in that life cycle, we flag the security methods and the risks that typically come at that. So let's say you're at the authentication stage. What are the security methods used to authenticate? What are the risks? What are the kinds of controls that people typically use? What kind of payment data is being used at that step that actually needs protection? And then also what risks come up at that step with associated with the sensitive data. And then across the life cycles and at every step, we also note where there are key legal regulatory references, other resources, and then again flag those challenges and opportunities to improve security at every step of the life cycle on that particular payment type. Next slide, please. But the tool, if you downloaded the whole thing, it looks like a big spreadsheet. But what's really great about what's on the website is that, again, it has a much more interactive, choose-your-own-adventure type feel. So one of the more user-friendly features of it is that you can compare across different payment types. So you can pull up controls and risks for up to 3 payment types at once. So that you can see, what do you have in common there, and then also what types of aspects are actually unique for that particular payment type. So that comparison tool, I think, provides a lot of value, particularly to compare, say, for example, legacy systems related to cards versus the wallet, the mobile wallet. So that's one example that we have highlighted here on the slide. If you could go to the next slide, please. So again, this is really, I think, an unprecedented resource in that it's really designed to be used by anyone and everyone, and it's publicly available. It's meant to be available to folks who are already practicing payments, maybe not working on necessarily every single kind of payment type, but certainly already have some level of expertise. But we also hope that it will provide a really foundational overview for folks who may be a little bit newer to payments and need to, if nothing else, understand the level of complexity that undergirds every type of payment type. So that's especially important for business leaders who need to make business decisions about how to invest in their infrastructure with regard to payment security. So the profiles are really meant to highlight potential vulnerabilities in various payment types, to educate stakeholders from the experts to folks who are new, and to really encourage best practices in payment security. And of course, for folks who are developing their own products, to help build into the product design those best practices for payment security, and certainly for people in this consumer advocacy community, for example, where I tend to spend my time. I think that this is a really important tool for advocates who need to understand the business challenges that come up in the context of payment security when considering how to make recommendations regarding certainly policy, legislation, or regulations. And it certainly provides a very comprehensive overview to truly understand how payments move, and again, to identify those key risks, and also hopefully look forward towards solutions that can reduce fraud risk to the best of our ability in the payments ecosystem. And with that, I will stop and pause to see if anybody has any questions.
Again, as a reminder, to submit a question electronically, click on the button at the bottom of your webinar screen. We have had a question come in for Ed. How do you see guidance evolving in light of payment card trends for tokenization as a merchant risk reduction strategy?
Oh, great. That's a great question. I think what I would point to in response is that as Suzanne just walked through the payment life cycles and security profiles, those contain a comprehensive view of the various security methods that are in place today for each of the various payment types. And specifically, I believe tokenization is one of the methods for securing the payment transactions that is identified within those life cycles and security profiles. And it's also important to note, as we'll talk about here in a few minutes, is that data protection in general across the payment system continues to be something that is top of mind for industry and participants, as well as you'll see is an area of focus for potential future engagement as well. So things like tokenization and other methods for protecting data continue to be top of mind and a focus.
Great, thank you. I don't have any further questions at this point, so Ed, I'd like to turn it back to you to discuss what's next.
Great, thank you, and thanks again, Brian and Suzanne. Really, it's good to hear perspectives from the industry on how these resources are being used and leveraged today, and your insights into how others can use them within the industry. So again, appreciate you taking the time to provide your feedback and overview of each of those resources. So as we talked about at the beginning of the webinar today, while we formally concluded the task force, I want to make sure that everyone is aware that that doesn't mean our engagement with the industry or that our efforts around payment security are concluded. So we want to talk a little bit about what's next. So if we turn to slide 14, just to kind of give a quick overview of what we'll be talking about here shortly is that there are the data sources and the payment life cycles and security profiles provided valuable resources to the industry, as you heard from both Brian and Suzanne. And they're also providing a good foundation. So all the learnings and the discussions and dialogue that took place within the task force setting, as well as the publication of the two deliverables from the task force, really provide a valuable foundation for the next phase of work from a secure payments perspective. If we turn to slide 15, just to provide a brief overview of what we'll be talking about here over the next few minutes. So I want to talk a little bit about the next steps. So again, the Federal Reserve continues to believe that payment security provides a strong foundation for a strong and secure payment system as a whole. And in terms of next steps, if you recall in our next steps paper that was released in 2017, we discussed taking on 2 additional activities. The first is analyzing and prioritizing payment security vulnerabilities and kicking off a study related to those, which we'll talk about here shortly. And also to continue with our Fed-sponsored and or industry-sponsored collaboration activities. And we'll talk about that as well. I'll lead some of those discussions and then turn it to Megan as well for the future engagement opportunities. And while we won't touch upon it specifically here today, too, the third piece in terms of next steps is the Federal Reserve continues to enhance our own risk management services. So in those areas where we are an operator of payment systems, we continue to evolve our risk management solutions to ensure that they keep up with the evolving threat in today's payments industry. If we turn to the next slide, I want to spend just a few moments giving you a quick overview of the Federal Reserve Payments Fraud Study. So as I mentioned, our next steps paper that was released in 2017, one of the areas of focus for next steps for security included this kicking off this payments fraud study. So I'm pleased to announce that in March of 2018, the Federal Reserve contracted with the Boston Consulting Group, and we kicked off a payments fraud study. And really the purpose there is to analyze various payment security vulnerabilities, assess potential approaches to mitigate those, including any identification of incentives that may be misaligned and hinder progress towards that. Currently underway, so this study is in process as we speak. The current area of focus that's being looked at is really taking a measurement of payments fraud and associated costs across the various payment types in the ecosystem, as well as across the various stakeholders in the ecosystem. So not only looking at fraud losses, but also looking at the costs associated with preventing fraud, detecting fraud, and responding to fraud. In addition to that, we're also reviewing and identifying the causes and the main contributing factors to that payments fraud. So think through what the type of vulnerabilities that may exist in the payment system today that are contributing or leading to fraud occurring on the system. We are also, as part of this study, considering whether or not to look at the assessment of potential approaches for mitigating those vulnerabilities and mitigating ultimately the fraud associated with the various payment types, and the associated business case for each of those approaches, looking at the cost benefit and the societal cost benefit across the various stakeholders involved in each of those payment types. The important part here is that these efforts are helping already to inform our next steps for engagement, and they will continue to help us refine those activities as we move forward. If we turn to slide 17, I want to provide just a quick overview of some of the potential future areas of focus. So again, we'll highlight that these are really what we're seeing based on the input and output of the Secure Payments Task Force efforts, the initial findings and results of some of the efforts with Boston Consulting Group on our payments fraud study, in addition to our ongoing engagement with many of the industry stakeholders, really finding that there's 5 key areas of focus that have potential for future industry engagement. I'll walk quickly through each of these, not spending a whole lot of time, but just want to highlight the rationale for some of these and why they're areas of focus. If you look at the first 2 around preventing security weaknesses and vulnerabilities on endpoints, as well as the secure interconnectivity of emerging payment solutions. As we continue to see the payments ecosystem transform to a digital payment system, there's additional endpoints that continue to have access to various financial services or various payment services. Those could be through things such as a new mobile application. It could be through a web browser or other means to facilitate or gain access to the payment system. Many of those new improvements or innovations in the system could ride on existing payment system rails, such as the ACH network or the credit card network or the debit card networks. And also, there are other innovations that will be that are considered to be riding on new, more faster payments solutions. So making sure that those endpoints remain secure and the interconnectivity between these new channels to gain access to the payment system and the existing and new ecosystem are managed appropriately. The middle one there speaks to really the a common theme that was brought up in both the task force setting, but also is carried forward through our industry engagements and continues to be an area of focus in the payment system. And that's really around payment industry identity verification, management, and authentication. In light of the recent breaches of not only payment information, but also of personally identifiable information, as well as the rise of other types of fraud, such as synthetic identity fraud. This continues to be an area of focus for future engagement. We already talked about data breaches. We also, as the question posed earlier, talked about the various methods for protecting payment data that flows throughout the system. This is another area of focus of continuing to find better ways to protect the data used to authenticate users as part of an enrollment process or even as part of the initiation of a transaction, as well as to authorize payment transactions throughout the payment flow. And lastly, I think another one that carried forward from the task force, but is also, again, key and top of mind, is to continue furthering industry collaboration on payments fraud detection, reporting, and information sharing initiatives. We recognize there's a lot of there's a number of initiatives underway within the industry, many of them focused on specific industry verticals or within a specific payment type to report and share information. But there's opportunities, as we've heard from the task force setting as well as other industry engagements, is that there's opportunity to expand those initiatives outside of current verticals into broader payments participants. Lastly, let me just stop and pause and see if there's any questions on those activities before I turn it over to Megan to walk through our next steps in terms of industry engagement.
We do have a question from the audience. They would like to know when the fraud study will be published.
It's a great question. So as I mentioned at the top of the next steps discussion, the payments fraud study is currently underway. So we are working together with the Boston Consulting Group to work through the areas of the focus that we talked about already, as well as we're continuing to assess those other potential phases of that fraud study. We do anticipate, after reviewing the results and gathering the inputs through that study, likely towards the late summer, early fall timeframe, that we would publish any results of that study.
With that, let me turn the call over to Megan Musgrave to talk about the Fed Payments Improvement Community.
Great. Thank you, Mary Ellen. So if we can please move to slide 18, that would be great. So over the course of this session, we've talked a lot about the really great work that has already been published to securepaymentstaskforce.org, and we've also talked a lot about the work that's currently underway that will help inform our next steps. So I think that logically leads us to the question of how you, the folks on the phone and on the webinar, can make sure that you're aware of the latest announcements related to this work, and also how you can become a part of this work and really engage with us, provide your feedback on forthcoming deliverables, and really just make sure that your voice is heard in our quest to really improve the payment system within the United States. And so during the last portion of this webinar, I'll just quickly go over the Fed Payments Improvement Community and what that really means and what it offers in terms of engagement, as it's really one of the pillars in our strategy to collaborate with the industry to make sure that all of our desired outcomes are fully reflecting the needs of the entire payments ecosystem. And so if we'll transition over to slide 19, so the Fed Payments Improvement Community was a group that was initially stood up in 2013 and has since been enhanced following the release of the Next Steps paper. And so this is a group of more than 4,600 different stakeholders who are interested in staying involved and being engaged in our payment system improvement initiatives. And so while that is a really large number, I would also like to emphasize that it's also a very diverse group. We have folks from all sizes of financial institutions. We have folks from fintech firms, from businesses, from government agencies, regulators, regulators, consulting firms, even industry trade organizations, consumer interest groups, and of course individuals who are just interested in learning more and contributing to all of the work that's underway. So we're very proud and very thankful for everyone who has taken the time to sign up to become a member of the Fed Payments Improvement Community. And so basically as a member, you can expect to receive regular communications that invite you for interaction opportunities, engagement opportunities, and you'll also receive regular programming that provides information and updates on some of the latest announcements that are being put forward. And so I'll just quickly walk through each of these different buckets that are listed on the slide to provide a few examples and just really bring to light kind of what this means as a member of the Fed Payments Improvement Community. So in terms of interaction, you, of course, will be able to network and talk to all of the 4,600 different members, either through our various in-person events, at conferences, and also contribute to surveys and things like that. So you will receive invitations to attend webinars such as this one that you're on right now. And we also hosted a webinar on the Governance Framework Formation Team's operating vision for the Faster Payments Council earlier this month as well. So as topics come up, there will be opportunities to learn more and really just take a deeper dive on some of those subjects. You'll also have the opportunity to attend in-person events. We are very excited to announce that we just sent out the save the date for our inaugural Fed Payments Improvement Community Forum, which will be occurring this October in downtown Chicago. And so we'll be sending out the formal invite in the coming weeks, but very excited to be putting together this opportunity for all members of the Fed Payments Improvement Community to get together and really dialogue about some of the latest initiatives and provide feedback and really just make sure that everything that's being worked on right now is able to get input from our diverse payment system stakeholders. And we also offer the opportunity to network at industry conferences. So in the fall, we'll be sending out another call to see who is going to be at some of our conferences. That way we can get together at a one-on-one meeting and really just talk through everything that's going on. Again, really just giving members of the community the opportunity to sit down, share their concerns, and provide feedback on some of the latest initiatives. In terms of the information and communications that community members receive, we do have a monthly newsletter that goes out, and this provides a really good synopsis of all of the announcements that have gone on the preceding month and also flags different engagement opportunities. That way folks can sign up to participate. They're aware of surveys that they can provide their feedback on and various things like that. And then one of the key drivers of the community is really the opportunity to influence and to provide input on the various initiatives that are underway. So folks who are a member of the Fed Payments Improvement Community will receive periodic invites to participate in small targeted working groups, dependent on your areas of interest, your resource availability, and things like that. We really want this to be as flexible as possible. So as folks are interested, they can sign up to participate in these working groups. And so all of this really comes together with the goal of providing consistent, regular programming that gives all interested stakeholders access to the work that's going on in support of the desired outcomes. So it's really just a good engagement opportunity for folks to sign up for. As I mentioned, it's very flexible. You can either join the community so you can receive the latest announcements, or you can join the community with the intent of further engaging in work groups, participating in surveys, and things like that. And so with that, we'll quickly transition to slide 20. By virtue of being on this call, I am hopeful that many of you are already a member of the Fed Payments Improvement Community. But if you're not, I strongly encourage you to visit fedpaymentsimprovement.org so that you can submit your membership profile. For those of you who are a member, I do strongly encourage you to kind of revisit your profile, make sure that you've selected your areas of interest, which includes topics such as data protection, fraud detection and information sharing, and things related to faster payments implementation and payments efficiency. By selecting those different topics of interest, we'll be able to better engage with you, sending you targeted communications, and really just making sure that you are aware of opportunities and announcements that relate to your interests. And if you already are a member, we also do strongly encourage you to share this opportunity within your personal network and at your organization, because unlike the task forces where only one representative per organization was allowed to participate, the Fed Payments Improvement community is open to all stakeholders, so we can have multiple representatives from the same organization. Moving over to slide 21. This slide just provides a really good summary of all of the different channels that we have available, both that host information and also where you can receive the latest updates. So in the top row, those are the various websites that the Federal Reserve hosts either for the task forces, and then also the FedPaymentsImprovement.org is really the hub for the Fed Payments Improvement community. And then our various social media channels are listed below as well. So we encourage you to follow those so you can stay in the loop on some of the latest announcements and opportunities to engage. And so with that, I will pause and see if there are any questions about the Fed Payments Improvement community, or if there are any questions about any of the other content that we've covered throughout the webinar.
We do have a question for you in terms of whether former task force members need to sign up for the community, or if they belong to the community already.
Yeah, that's a great question, Mary Ellen. Thank you. So after both the FASTER and the Secure Payments Task Forces concluded, they were automatically transitioned into the community, so they are in fact a member.
Another question about the in-person meeting. You mentioned sending out formal invitations. How does someone get on the invitation list to attend one of those meetings?
Yeah, that's also a really good question. So by virtue of signing up for the Fed Payments Improvement community, you'll be added to our distribution list, and so that's how you'll receive the formal invitation to participate.
Good reason to join. I do not currently see any other questions. I will pause for a minute and ask if anyone else would care to submit. Otherwise, we are, I think, nearing the end of our time together. So hearing no further questions, let me take this opportunity to thank again our speakers for today, Ed O'Neill, Brian Penny, Suzanne Martindale, and Megan Musgrave. We very much appreciate your preparation and your thoughtful comments, your time and your expertise. I'd also like to thank everyone who took the time out of their busy schedules today to attend our webinar. We look forward to an ongoing dialogue with you through the Fed Payments community, and we very much appreciate your interest. Again, if you'd like to learn more or if you have additional questions, please visit fedpaymentsimprovement.org. With that, I will wish you a good afternoon, and thank you again for joining our webinar.